Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. Today, I am joined by Seven Graham. Seven, also known as 7G, is an intersex, trans, and non-binary creativity, mental health, trauma, authenticity, diversity, and communications trailblazer. And you're also a comedian and film producer. So welcome, Seven.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to not be very funny today, though. So lower your expectations, everybody.
Great thing about grief is that, we often end up laughing, surprisingly. And, prior to transitioning, Seven was called Sarah Graham and was a respected communications and mental health advisor in the UK. So actually, I knew of you back then in the UK because a friend of mine had come to you for some help, some counselling, and then you moved to LA and we sort of tried to connect and then we didn't, and then we found ourselves in the yoga community, Kundalini yoga community, and here we are now talking about grief. So thank you so much for being here. And I know
thank you for inviting me.
A little bit about your story, but I was thinking maybe if we could go all the way back to the very beginning of when you were born, and you were born as
oh my goodness.
Yeah, so go ahead. You go ahead. Yeah.
Well, so you want me to go back to April the 15th, 1969. I just scraped into the 60s. Well, I was born, as you said, the doctors said that I was a girl because, of course, doctors go on genitals, and they kind of looked at me and thought, this is a girl. But it turned out that wasn't the whole truth. In fact, it wasn't the truth at all. I didn't discover until I was in my 20s, but doctors found out in 1977 that I'm actually intersex.
Mm-hmm.
You've frozen, so that makes me worried that we're not recording. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. So let's hope that it's all good. Yeah.
Hello, Tara.
Oh no, I'm still here. Oh dear. And now
okay, I'll just keep.
Yeah, keep going. Keep
going. I'm just going to keep going unless you tell me to stop.
Yes, go ahead. Keep going. Yeah.
Okay, here we are, everybody, coping with this COVID scenario, with this wonderful Zoom. We're going to do our best. Okay, so yes, I was. It was discovered by my doctor, who was Sir John Professor Dewhurst, the world eminent gynecologist, that I actually am intersex. Now, we're told, of course, that humans are male or female, but that's not actually true. As many ancient cultures realize, there are actually people who sit between those two sexes, those two genders. There are many other genders, even in Judaism. There are 6 recognized genders in Torah, and Native Americans recognize men, women, and two spirits. And intersex people fall within the two spirits category. So although I looked outwardly female, although I did have a big clitoris, and that's something I talk about in my stand-up, when does a clitoris become a penis? Doctors have rules about that. But to all intents and purposes, they thought I was a girl. But interestingly, even by the age of 7 and 8, I was very much saying to my family that I'm not a girl. I knew that I wasn't a girl from the very youngest age. And my mother and I had a major battle around that through my childhood, because she wanted to have a girly girl and put me in ballet and have long hair and pigtails and all of that. As we can see, I can just come back from the barber. This is my preferred length. But through my childhood, I had long blonde hair and pigtails and all of that stuff. I knew that wasn't who I was. And then they discovered that I actually had internal testes instead of ovaries. I did have a vagina, but I had testes as well. And that I actually have XY chromosomes. So, biologically, I really am a mixture. I didn't find that out until I was 25. I knew that I'd had an operation when I was 8, and they told me that I had cancerous ovaries. So that, in terms of getting to the subject that you want to talk about, grief, that was the start of my very overt grief journey, because my family obviously were distraught that their daughter, as they thought, had cancerous ovaries. They actually told my parents that story too. So from that age on, I always thought that I'd kind of evaded the Grim Reaper. They told me that I was very lucky to be diagnosed, and if I hadn't been diagnosed, I'd have had cancer in my teenage years and probably died, because it would have been advanced by the time they found it, they thought. That was the whole story. All of that turned out to be lies. I discovered when I was in my mid-20s that actually the ovaries were testes, healthy testes, and that surgery was performed to reinforce the rigid pink and blue boxes, and this belief that there are only 2 sexes. So that opened up a whole other world of grief in terms of my experience as a child, in terms of realizing that my gender identity and my sense of who I was always correct, and that I'd been really trying to conform to that pink box, and none of that had been listened to or heard, enormous grief happened as a consequence of that discovery.
I'm not surprised. So you were in your early 20s.
I'm going to let you speak for a moment now.
Okay. Can you hear me? Am I moving? You were in your early 20s, and how did that grief manifest itself in your life at that time?
Yes, I can. Yeah, no, I can hear you.
Were you conscious of the grief? Or was it something that you dealt with by suppressing it?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't have seen it as grief then, but I now see that what happened was I went into anger, and I went into and that anger I turned against myself in a lot of self-hatred. The word that came to my mind when a doctor finally got honest with me was freak. I felt like I was this horrible freak, and that nobody would love me or accept me if they knew the truth of who I was. At that point, I was my identity was that of lesbian, and I had a girlfriend sat in the waiting room when I was told the truth. And so I thought that I was going to be kicked out of the lesbian club. And in fact, obviously nowadays with the TERFs, I would be kicked out of the lesbian club because they would see me as genetically male. And so, that's a whole other discussion we probably haven't got time to go into today. But my story is quite interesting in terms of what's going on in culture around the culture wars about trans identities and the body, and who is a real woman and who is a real man, and what our identity is, and all of that stuff. But I ran into my addiction, basically. I'm 20 years sober now, and I didn't get sober until December the 12th, 2001. So I had, a good few years in very active addiction, running away from that pain, running away from that grief, turning that anger against myself in depression, anxiety, but really relying on a lot of substances. I'd had suicide attempts when I was a teenager. When I was 14, I had 2 suicide attempts. I'd always felt that the Grim Reaper was, over my shoulder. And, me running into addiction in a very kind of serious kind of rolling the dice kind of way, never knowing whether, the next time I went out and drank and used, I'd end up dead or raped or in a gutter or whatever. And that was very much about me trying to have some control over all of these very big feelings. I didn't know what those feelings were. But, with 20 years sobriety under my belt, and having had access to some incredible therapists and healing communities and environments, and hundreds if not thousands of people within the recovery communities and the fellowships that I go to, today sat here as a mental health professional, addiction professional, and person who's done a lot of the work, I very much see that in terms of healing grief and all of the different feelings that we associate with grief.
Do you think that when you were even doing your training, for example, to become a therapist, a mental health advisor, did it come up in that training that you were experiencing grief, that grief could have been part of like the link with your addiction, or is that something that's come to your awareness later on?
I think that one of the things that I think is fascinating about this subject, as I'm sure you will hear from your other speakers, and many of the people watching this will know from their own lived experience, is that grief is a multifaceted, three-dimensional thing that affects us in every dimension of our being is affected by grief. And my experience is that they have a saying in recovery, which is being in recovery is like peeling back the layers of an onion. And I would say with each year that I've gone on from 2001, my understanding and awareness and the healing has happened in deeper and deeper and deeper ways. And it's involved many different modalities, many different tools, many different therapists to truly get to a point where I feel like, of course, grief is always there on some level. The huge thing that happened in 2001 that finally led me to going into rehab and facing my addictions was my father dying. And as anybody who's lost a parent knows, nothing before losing a parent can prepare you for the experience of losing a parent. Even if you don't like your parent, even if you don't have a good relationship with your parent, there's something hugely profound about that loss that changes everything. And my father's cancer came back in 2001. I was struggling to stay sober through that year, picking up 30 days and 60 days of sobriety. I'm very, very grateful I had the experience of being with him through his cancer, through his secondary cancer. So he knew quite early on in that diagnosis that it was going to be, he wasn't going to come back from it this time. So I got to have some very lovely experiences with him, grieving with him as he was facing his death. And I stayed sober even through the funeral, which again, I'm very, very grateful that was the case. And then I relapsed the night of his funeral in the November, and then ended up in rehab on December the 12th, so just a few weeks later. And it was only in those last few weeks that I became what I could see very clearly was an addict. My denial around addiction was I was high functioning. I always had a job through my addiction. I became more and more successful through my addictions. Part of my addictions were linked to working and success and achieving my dreams. So outwardly, hardly anybody knew that I was an addict when I ended up in rehab. Even employers at the BBC, some of those people like Lorraine Hegarty at Children's BBC were deeply shocked because they'd seen me masquerading as this healthy person Monday to Friday, turning up at work on a bike, eating super healthy, working really, really hard and delivering. What they hadn't seen was that I was then Friday night, that's when I'd start drinking and drugging all weekend to Sunday night, then come down and go to work on the Monday. So it was a shock to all of those people that I was an addict. But when my father died, the wheels came off. When my father died, I was that person who was drinking and using 24/7 and had zero control. And I could also see that I was insane in that I was just behaving in a completely suicidal way and with complete disregard to the people around me. It was a car crash for everybody. And I could see that I was putting other people through huge pain as well. Doing stuff like trying to jump out of a first floor window to go and score drugs, even though I knew I was going to a rehab in a few days. And I just wanted to kill myself at that point. My partner found me leaving the house one morning with the intent of going to jump in the River Thames because I couldn't face another day of addiction. Thank goodness I made it into that rehab. And it was there that obviously they detoxed me so I could get some kind of rationality back. But it was then that I could start facing the real loss of my father and everything that came up with that, which was huge. I suddenly felt adrift in the world. I felt like my protector was gone, but I also felt it and I had no real conception of chakra or energy. I dabbled with new agey stuff, but I hadn't really done the work and had the lived experience of all of that. When my father died, even before I physically knew from the phone call that he was dead, I felt it energetically. I could feel the energetic cord cut with him. I could feel this massive hole in me. And then it made sense when I realized that he was dead, a few hours later.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing all of that. So powerful. And while you were talking about your addiction, you know, and you were saying you were quite functioning for a lot of it, it was making me think about, you know, sort of ambiguous addiction, if you like. And in a sense, what we're going to get onto with in terms of identity is one of those ambiguous griefs, because so often people associate that word grief with the death of a person, and actually grief is showing up all the time in our lives, and we don't really honor it and appreciate what a lot of people are going through. And you know, you moved country to Los Angeles, kind of similar time to me, I believe, and it's quite interesting.
For love.
Yeah. When you move country, you have this, you know, it's very free. This was my experience, like very freeing. You know, I had this identity in London as a business owner with a fashion business. And, you know, I just wanted to be free and not have any of these identities. And so I'm guessing, you know, I'd be interested to hear about how that was for you, because obviously it was whilst in LA that you decided to make this transition.
Yes, I think that's right. The changing country is huge, and there is a whole grief process attached to that in terms of loss of loved ones, or, you know, intimate physical connection with loved ones, and culture, and you know, literally being in LA, I'm 8 hours behind you, as you know. So even if you're communicating regularly with your family, I go to bed listening to Today on Radio 4. So you in England are starting your day as I'm going to bed. So you feel like you're living on different planets to a certain extent. How that manifested for me in terms of the career side of things. Yes, in Britain, I'd been a qualified addiction therapist. I trained with the Priory, and I'd done that full time for over 10 years. I'd run a clinic at the Hale Clinic I'd worked with Theresa Hale to set up their first addiction program and run a successful holistic addiction treatment program out of the Hale, accessing all of their wonderful therapists. They had over 75 therapists that I could create a care plan with. You know, I worked with all of those different healers to get a knowledge of what they did, so I could, you know, do an assessment with each client and then put together a unique bespoke care plan. So I was very much known in the UK as Sarah Graham, then the addiction expert. I was an advisor to the British government, sitting on the advisory council on misuse of drugs. The only person in recovery sat, or out being in recovery, sat on that committee. I served 2 terms for 6 years. I also helped set up the Amy Winehouse Foundation. I was the lead spokesperson for the British government around their drugs campaign for young people. Frank, if you want to know about drugs, talk to Frank. I was the person who popped up on the news every time there was a story in the news that needed explaining, or if there was a change in the law. You know, like when crystal meth got classified as a Class A drug, I was that person who popped up on the news. So living in Britain, wherever I went at that point, I looked very different. People in Britain think, oh, I don't recognize this person. Well, I had long blonde hair and looked super girly through that stage, so you wouldn't recognize me. If you Google me and have a look back, then you'll think, oh my goodness, this is an Orlando-esque transformation. I was this blonde person who popped up on the television regularly, and so that's what I was known for. Everybody would approach me and ask me addiction questions. It was very much my life, and I loved it, and I still love working with people around that. I do it in a much smaller way these days, because now I'm focused more on creative work, building new Hollywood, getting stories told that haven't been told before. And I'll come to that in a minute. So here, nobody knew me. I was completely anonymous. Each year in my recovery, I do an annual challenge. And in 2014, I did skydiving. 2015, I did stand-up comedy. So I'd had this experience of doing stand-up comedy and being told by the trainer, you need to do this. You have the thing that I can't teach, because I'd killed the night of the kind of real performance. Here, nobody knew me. I didn't have a green card. I knew that I wanted a break from addiction work. I knew that I had a lot of healing to do, because I basically come to save my marriage. And, you know, my marriage was very rocky when I came here. And, you know, so there were a lot of big question marks. So I started going out and doing stand-up comedy in the clubs as an anonymous person. So that was a transformation. In terms of becoming Seven Graham, 7G as my stage name is, for stand-up and for acting, my health basically failed me. That was what happened that led to that transformation. I didn't choose to become transmasculine. How this happened was my basically I started getting disabled. I had my ankles were packing up, my Achilles heels were breaking down. I thought I was going to end up in a wheelchair. I thought I had MS or one of those really horrible illnesses. And I avoided going to the doctor for a long time because I have so much medical trauma. I avoid medicine, Western medicine, as much as possible. I finally went in and discovered my body was rejecting estrogen, the hormone they put me on when I was 12 years old after removing my testes. So my body was rejecting the estrogen. I had the hormone profile of a 90-year-old, in my late 40s. So they suggested to me that I try testosterone to see whether that would help. But I was in theory supposed to be completely immune to it. But I had a testosterone shot, and very quickly I realized that I was now finally running on the right fuel. They told me that I wasn't going to experience any physical changes because I'm immune to testosterone. My face and my clitoris disagreed with that idea. Big physical changes started happening. And I was really scared of that. I think change, transformation, some of the things that we face in life are very scary. We're not prepared for them. They're outside of anything we've imagined that our life is going to happen. I think this is one of the things about grief that is so profound about it. Often it is like that, or we've got very little time to intellectually prepare for it. I knew that I didn't want to end up in a wheelchair, and I knew that I really wanted to do anything, but I didn't know that it was going to involve me changing so much and becoming this different person. But I have to say, I'm so happy that happened to me. A, because I'm physically healthier than I've been my whole life. I skateboard and cycle everywhere, and my body is in great shape now. But B, I really feel like myself at last. Through going through the grief of losing who I was, this female person, and then kind of bring to the old person. And last year, I think, was very much, and this is all new still, last year was very much about embracing that masculinity and saying goodbye to that femininity. I think that this year is going to be about synthesis, because I'm sure that you understand this, that I believe that all human beings have male and female energy, and it's kind of like a graphic equalizer. We all have different levels of all of these different things that we associate with male and associate with female. I think we all have our own unique combination of those factors, and there are two poles, male and female, which are the two extremes. But I think a lot of people, not just intersex people, a lot of people are kind of rainbow, is why I'm wearing the rainbow, are kind of somewhere on that rainbow spectrum in the middle. Certainly as a therapist, I've worked with many people who have questions around their male identity or their female identity. And I think it's really great we're moving into a world where non-binary is becoming something that everybody knows about, and this question of pronouns, and everybody is thinking about it. And this is good, because before the age of Aquarius, we were just given these things. We were just put in these boxes and told, this is who you are. You're from this class. You've got this gender. This is what you're going to do for a job. All of that stuff, it was decided for us, or a lot of it was decided for us. Now, in this new age, and with the internet and all of the wonderful tools that we've got, we're all realizing that we don't have to subscribe to all of that, and we can completely invent ourselves. And what I've come to in terms of the work that I do now, which I call the alchemy of authenticity, which is very much grounded in my own spiritual, physical, and creative journey, is I help people get in touch with who they are as an authentic human being. And when we live in that authenticity, that's when we can be truly happy and in our power. Yeah. Letting go of the lies, letting go of other people's beliefs and expectations, and finding what really feels truthful to us in our hearts. The heart is the most important human organ. We're obsessed with genitals. The current culture war is all about genitals. And that's just such a physical, plain, simplistic understanding of humanity. The heart, the soul, the spirit, that's what's really important in terms of who we are and what guides us, I believe.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree with you more. And it is wonderful that we've got so much more information and awareness and tolerance, but it still comes with, any change and transformation still comes with an element of struggle and pain, so Could you
Of
just
course.
share a little bit about maybe your struggle and pain and what helped you, and how, you know, different modalities potentially that helped you, anything like that?
Yeah. There's a wonderful saying in recovery, which is acceptance is the key. Which I find enormously helpful. And, a lot of people are obviously realizing the powerfulness of mindfulness techniques and being in the here and acknowledging, Eckhart Tolle, power of now. Many of us are kind of understanding that, and that's profoundly important. But I think I was thinking about what I can most contribute to this discussion for everybody. And I think it's twofold. First of all, my experience and the way I work is very much about people using a multitude of tools, and everybody needs different tools in their toolkit to access that pain and to let it out and to be with it and to process it and to go through that healing journey. And I think one of the big things, which is so annoying in a way, but so true, is that true healing, deep healing, that goes beyond the superficial, takes time. And if COVID has given us one thing, I think it has changed our conception of time, and it has given many of us the space to realize things about ourselves and to heal things, or to begin that healing journey that we couldn't do before, because we were all so invested and obsessed with the 9 to 5 and meeting our commitments and being out there in the world and doing all of that. So first of all, the healing process is a big one that takes time, and the feelings involved they're not nice feelings. They're in terms of, they're big, they're unruly, they don't want to conform to society's expectations or rules. We can't plan for them. You can't schedule how long you're going to need to grieve, because everybody's going to be different. And that's okay. So we have to surrender to the process. And that's another thing which I've really got from my recovery journey. Surrender. We have to surrender and accept that it is going to be what it's going to be, and we can do our part. And we need to do our part. We need to be prepared to put the effort and the time into that, and to be honest with people we love, and to not hide what we're going through, to make other people feel more comfortable. Obviously we need to have boundaries in terms of our own personal safety. There are lots of people out there it's not safe to share with. Bosses, for example, can be very unsupportive, etc. So that's all. I understand what that's about, and I've done a lot of that myself. And again, I think my father dying was a profound gift to me. I don't think I'd be alive today if it hadn't been for that. So I think there is a real silver lining to grief, and often, of course, yin and yang. There is something that's powerful, and there are great lessons that we can take from any loss, no matter how awful that loss is. And we have a choice in terms of deciding what we do with that. And my father's death, I was somebody who very much lived in their head, who was very in control. And when he died, for example, I'll tell one story, and this is me getting vulnerable for a moment. I had that moment where I walked, at the Undertaker's, where I walked in and I saw him lying in his coffin, where my legs went from under me. It's a common experience. We've seen it in dramas and all of that stuff. I never thought that would be me. I always thought that I would be the stick upper lip person, and I never thought that would be me. And it was horrible, but at the same time, it was profound, because it showed me something very important about my relationship with my father and my love for my father, and how great an event in a terrible way this was. But that kind of laid the groundwork for me accepting this as something that I wasn't prepared for, and I didn't know what I was going into. So I had to surrender to it. And I did surrender to it, by getting sober. I then surrendered to let the feelings be whatever they're going to be, rather than trying to change them. And that's, I think, a very important thing. We live in a culture that we are constantly, addiction is all about control, the C word, control. Addiction is all about control. And we live in a society and a culture where we're constantly trying to control things. And if anything, grief, and healing grief, is about letting ourselves letting the process work. The process knows what it is. You know, the inner wise healing guide within us knows what needs to be done for us to heal it and to get to that place of acceptance and being able to look on that person's life and honor who they were and what they gave us, and carry, you know, every day in my recovery, I carry the light of my father and his gifts with me. I know I am very much my father's child. I wouldn't be a stand-up comedian if it wasn't for my father. I wouldn't be a creative person largely if it wasn't for my father. Although my mother, if she watches this, she's a very good drawer and she does have a creativity in gardening. But my father had a specific kind of visual creativity and storytelling as well. I'm related to Wordsworth on my father's side, and the storytelling very much comes through the Scottish ancestors. And, you know, I honor my Scottish ancestors, and, you know, my father dying really gave me that connection as well with those Scottish ancestors. I feel that very strongly. And I've done work with incredible people like the modern day wizard. Do you know the modern day wizard, Andrew? He's great. I did work with him that I did past life regression therapy, which was very powerful. Okay, so that's one thing. I just wanted to let people out there know that I know what this is and I respect this process, because the next thing I'm going to say is potentially controversial, which is, and this comes from my addiction background and working with people who are addicts, and this doesn't apply to everybody, you know, although I think we are living in an increasingly addicted society, and there are many things that are being designed deliberately to entrap us and addict us, you know, social media and food and other technologies. Some very intelligent people are doing everything to addict us and entrap us. They're really understanding the neurochemistry of the brain and working to addict us. So, but there are many people who don't naturally have an addictive personality. However, you know, one of the things which I have really learned and which I really work with is addiction to thought processes and addiction to feelings. And I think grief is one of these areas that we can get addicted to grief. We can get addicted to the pain of grief. And there can be a sense of not wanting to let go of that, because the belief might be that if I let go of the intensity of this pain, if I stop feeling it so acutely, it means that they're gone and I don't care as much. And of course, that's not true. But in order for us to move through these different stages of grief, we need to let ourselves move through them, you know, and not get trapped in them. And I know for me, I have been trapped in certain stages at different points. And also I have had people who are very close to me who haven't healed their grief or who are trapped in a stage. And I've seen how that has damaged them. They haven't got on with their lives. They haven't got to a point where they could have a new relationship or where they could function in the world, you know, anywhere near their capabilities. And, you know, I think we have limited time on earth. It's very important we honor grief and that we don't run from it. And as a society, we massively run from it. And this is, again, why I'm so glad you're doing this. But we also need to heal. And we need to show up in the world and to be able to do what we're here for.
Yes. I love everything you're saying. And, you know, one of the things that I often talk about is, and what you will also know lots about, having done Kundalini teacher training, is the importance of keeping our hearts open, because the tendency is that we shut down, we protect ourselves, and then we're very afraid to open ourselves up again.
Yes.
And then we're not living fully. And so, thank you so much for sharing all of that so beautifully and so articulately. And I was thinking, when you were talking about like honoring your father, and I was thinking, when you left Sarah and became 7, did you do a sort of ritual around that? Is there things that you miss about Sarah, and did you have to grieve those things, or are you feeling so much more sort of grounded in yourself as 7?
I think that other people, and this is one of the things about trans that's difficult, and I think this is one of the reasons why it is, you know, that's fueling the culture war. And I understand this, and I've met parents and worked with parents experiencing grief around other aspects, related to gender identity, etc., as well as addiction. there is a lot, my mother, bless her heart, she's trying really, really hard to call me Seven and gets it right 50% of the time, maybe. And pronouns, my pronouns are now he, they. I know that the they, their, them pronouns are very difficult for lots of people. They're very difficult for me. And, it's work in progress. She hasn't got her head around the pronouns at all. She's still calling me she. And, I love my mother. I know that she's trying her hardest. I'm not going to get upset about that. In terms of me, you asked me about me. I think that it was important for me to really let go of Sarah last year. Last year, I was very much going into my male energy and embracing my masculinity. I went through a stage where I just used he, him as my pronouns. I've now moved back to he, they, because I think in terms of the inner child healing work I did, I discovered that I have inner children. I had the little inner Sarah, but I also had the little inner Stephen, and inner Stephen and inner Sarah, the synthesis of them is 7. So I politically, I think it's very important for me in my trans masculine identity to embrace my maleness and to talk about my maleness and to say that I am a masculine person with a vagina, and that's how God X non-binary God made me. And I think it's important for that debate, for people to hear that and see that. And like, I got the 38 double Ds, and it would be much easier for me in Hollywood if I were to have top surgery and to just embrace being a guy. I would find it much easier to get parts, etc. right here, right now. And it would be much easier for me to move through the world safely, because, if people, it's interesting. Most of the time people just call me dude and sir and all of that. But I have been in situations on the bus where people have clocked this, and that puts me in a physically dangerous zone, because there is a lot of anti-trans violence. We bring up great fear in people when they realize that those boxes, there are people outside of those boxes, and some people want to attack us and kill us for that. Trans people are murdered for being trans. But to answer your question, I think I will get to a point where I create a real synthesis. And like hearing when you first said Sarah today, a few months ago, I would have bristled about that, because that would have been using my dead name. And it would have been a little bit, but now I've moved beyond that, and I'm now comfortable with that. On my Wikipedia it says my old name and it says my new name, if anything, I think my story is about transformation and about the fact that each day is a new beginning, and each day we reinvent ourselves, and that's great, because we are dynamic, creative human beings, and why get too attached to any labels? A label, we need labels in certain senses for legal things and for political things, and having an identity is important, but at the same time, it's like the future is female. I don't believe the future is female, and I don't believe the future is male. We've had matriarchy. I grew up near Stonehenge and Avebury stone circles, very matriarchal culture celebrating the divine feminine, the goddess, and of course I have an awareness and a love for the divine feminine. But, for human beings to survive and for us to heal these great divisions and this violence and this war and this polarity, we need to move into our humanity and to the true recognition that we are spirits having a material experience, and to honor that diversity and celebrate that diversity. And, one of the things which I wanted to say to you, to thank you for, was last night I went and I looked at Netflix, Amazon Prime and Hulu and HBO and all of these people. I did the search for grief to have a look at what's on all of these different platforms around grief. The answer is very little. Which is shocking, because, grief, we all experience grief. And grief is a profound thing that we all have to deal with. And as humanity in the West, we are not dealing with it in most of our cultures. We're not dealing with it. So I'm in Hollywood to get intersex, non-binary, trans, queer, female and BIPOC stories told, and to change the narrative around those stories. But you have now spurred me on to get stories around grief told too, as well, because, there's actually very little out there to help people navigate grief. Most of us find ourselves in an acute grief situation without the tools or the awareness of what we're entering into, and that's got to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think as you were reflecting on the pandemic earlier, this pandemic has also put us into a grief on a global scale because our lives have changed immeasurably, and obviously a lot of people have been touched by death. So yeah, this is it seems like this is a good time to be really sharing and talking about grief, because it's not just for the people that have, like I said earlier, had somebody die. It's affecting us on so many levels, and a lot of the time we're not honoring the pain. We're just running from it or disguising it, masking it, and then it becomes a toxic situation. So yeah, I'm really, I suppose, calling it conscious grief, because it's around being aware of it. What is it? It's not just crying, you know, it's a many things, many emotions, and it affects us in many different ways.
Yes.
Would you like to give your interpretation of conscious grief?
I love that phrase. I think it's wonderful, and you know, we need. There's so many ways that we operate on an unconscious level and have been operating out of unconscious decision making and unconscious programming, and so now is the opportunity, and it's happening. It's already happening. The consciousness is raising, and grief absolutely needs to be part of that. And for things like living in America, part of what's going on here in terms of the profound battle around Black Lives Matter and everything, and we've seen it in Bristol with the Colston Four and in the UK, is because we haven't grieved the past and acknowledged the past and done the work about how we got to where we are, why it is that BIPOC communities are still so disadvantaged and how unfair that is, and the fact that they are that way because of historical exploitation and abuse and trauma. And so we as society, I live in Los Angeles, there are multi-million-dollar houses on my street and hundreds of homeless living in this community. So we really need to get to a place where we value all human lives and see that, we all have to be conscious and raise the bar for everybody. You can't just live in a world where you've got this tiny number of billionaires and everybody else, scrabbling around for this tiny amount of stuff. But I think the thought that I had in terms of grief and grief that's coming, COVID has also been an opportunity for us to really look at what we're doing to the planet and the fact that this is not sustainable, and we're already on a path that's going to cause great destruction to many societies and communities and wipe out whole groups of people, like the Maldives, beautiful, beautiful place, because we're not taking the action that we need to avert that disaster. So we are all, and I'm not a parent to children. I'm a parent to two furries, a beagle and a Tonkinese. But anybody who is a parent, as I know you are, what we're handing over to our children is not going to be the world that we had. And as conscious parents or conscious caretakers of this planet, we have to accept that the world is not going to carry on as it was. It can't. We have to massively change the way that we do things. We have to move back to a sustainable way of living where we repair things and we don't just dispose of something and get the next thing, whatever that is, because the world hasn't got enough resources to do that and it's killing us all. So we're all going to go through a grieving process of what we expected our lives to be and what we thought our lives were going to be materially, to move to a place where we have sustainable communities and we're living in a healthy way. And again, all of this is happening in some ways, but there are things that we can do as healers to speed that process or to support and birth that process. Do I need to say anything else about that? I mean, I am lucky because I'm physically healthy now. I don't have a car in Los Angeles. People think I'm a freak for that. I try and use as little plastic and, I am plant-based and all of this kind of stuff. But we all are going to go through this process of having to reimagine what it is to be a human and what we take out of the world, but also what we can give to the world, and moving back into a way of being where we don't see success in those strictly material terms, and we think about the gifts that we can give that are beyond physical.
Yeah, and I think what you're pertaining to is that there is going to be, we think that, oh, we're going to get over the pandemic and then we'll be back to normal. It's like, no,
not going to go back to normal.
We're going to be in a state of grief for a long time because the world is changing at a rapid level and I think most people are unaware of the changes that are ahead of us, and it's not going to be straightforward. Yeah.
But that's an example of how great grief is good. You know, we need to grieve. We need to get conscious of what's going on, and we need to grieve. That, you know, many people, I think, and as an addiction person, obviously I know this, many people turn to their old things, their old ways of coping initially, like excessive alcohol, seeing their dealer more often, hitting the ice cream, buying loads of shit on Amazon, excuse my language, but, you know, it is loads of shit on Amazon. You know, many people turn to that stuff because that was the old way of fixing and diverting and not being present and conscious. And it's gone on long enough that many people are coming into recovery now, or realizing that it doesn't work. It stops working. And so it's now time to look to other things, you know, for new ways, for new beginnings, because grief is about death. It's the end of the cycle. It is a natural, normal part of the cycle of life for everything. It's a beautiful stage in that it clears the deck. When I was really grieving in early recovery, David Gray's album A New Day at Midnight really, really helped me so much. I didn't realize it was about the loss of his father, but I found that album to be really, really profound to me. And I've done 9 months residential rehab for my addictions, and I did 3 months of trauma rehab at the refuge in Florida. I've worked with some of the best therapists in the world, shaman, healers of every modality. I've had all of that, and it was great, and it helped me get sober and heal in many ways. But writing my play, Angels Are Intersex, and performing that on stage, and also doing my stand-up comedy and performing that on stage and having that interaction with the audience, I would say that's been the most profound shift and healing experience, combined with Kundalini. Actually, I think Kundalini really helped me change the energy and release that. You know, I love somatic experience in therapy, and Kundalini was, in my experience of the Kundalini teacher training, was it accessed things that I was holding in my body that nothing else could shift, and it released them. You know, I didn't grieve the loss of my testes until I did that Kundalini teacher training, and then I had the profound grief experience, and also the energetic realization that they physically took my testes, but they didn't take the power that my testes represented, or I could get back in touch with my base chakra and channel the energy in a different way, which I have done. But I think many people are on a creative healing journey now and realizing the power of creativity, and that we're all creative beings, but many adults lost that. You know, children, we all accept that children are creative, but then many adults went into careers that didn't express or channel that creativity. But I think many of us are now realizing that whatever it is, be it crocheting or needlework or woodwork or whatever it is, that we all have things that we enjoy that are where we're physically present, where something is created. You know, look at this beautiful stone. You know, somebody just spent an hour or less than an hour making this beautiful stone, and this gives me so much pleasure. I'm so grateful that I found this in Palm Springs. It's very Palm Springs. But you know, we can all contribute to the world. We all have gifts. We can all make a lovely meal. We can all learn a new skill. And, you know, that's what we did as human beings. You know, I'm an anthropologist by academic training. I did anthropology and communications. And, you know, human society for most of our time on Earth was about living in tribes and everybody contributing something to the community in a creative way. And that brings a lot of happiness and a lot of pleasure and a lot of comfort. Coming back to grief, you know, doing these things can bring us a lot of comfort when, you know, everything can seem far too much.
Yes. One of my other interviews is a poet, and she said creativity brings hope, and I just love that so much. Yes. I think it truly does.
Yeah, and out of the just one more line. I know we.
I was going to say one. You know, I was going to say, please, if you've got one more thing to share. Yeah.
Well, just out of the greatest pain can come the greatest gifts.
Right.
You know, as a healer, that's very much the case, that the things which I thought were the worst, darkest, most awful things that I would never share with anybody else, those are the things that give me that profound ability to be with another person's pain and to sit with them and to listen, and to not be judgmental because of all of those terrible things I did. I have a very, you know, that gives me the gift of not judging another human being, and yeah, and just getting back in touch with that creativity can give us the hope and the light and the path back to living a life that is happy and joyous and free.
Yeah. 7. It has been such a delight. I'm so grateful. You have so much wisdom and you're so articulate, and I'm just so grateful that you've been here to do this. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you. Sat Nam.
Sat Nam. Sat Nam.